As I said, I like to start on time. For those of you who are here on time, hope you guys can hear me pretty well. This session is on the new NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which has only been out for a little over a month. So, show of hands, how many people here have used the prior NIST, the Cybersecurity Framework at work? Okay, so about half or so. This is more aimed at people who have never been familiar with it, but hopefully I won't bore you that are familiar with it. So a little bio me, I'm not going to go into it. I will point out that I spent 7 years doing the wonderful job of being a certified consultant, where I went into different companies of different sizes and types and assessed them against various frameworks and standards and whatnot. One of them being the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, 1.0 when it existed, 1.1 when it existed. So I had that exposure to what it was and assessing companies and dealing with some misunderstanding that people had about it and so forth. I don't do that anymore, but I still have kind of a hobby, if you will, of watching these different frameworks and standards and so forth, and see how they change. And I was involved with all the work that gave us NIST, the CSF 2.0. So kind of a rundown. We're going to go through some history and background, something about frameworks and controls. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the new CSF 2.0 and some of the elements and so forth. I will also give you a lot of resources and so forth. For those of you who are curious, because I'm kind of a nerd about this, this is actually the CSF and all the related documents. I like to do this. I like to print them out because I like paper. I'm a Luddite in that sense. And so I go to an office supply store and say, hey, spiral bound it. So this is all the 2.0 stuff. This is all the 1.1 stuff. And this is the privacy framework 1.0. I'll mention a little bit about that toward the end. So history, this is the just basic history of the CSF. It started out back in 2013 with an executive order. They started doing some work on it and so forth. What this doesn't show is there was a lot of public workshops. What I found interesting with the CSF versus other frameworks is that if you wanted to be involved in developing it and input into it, you could do so. If you're familiar with the ISO 27001 frameworks and stuff like that, us ordinary folks will have no chance whatsoever to be involved with that. Let's be honest. So most of these frameworks and standards that are out there, a lot of us, we won't have an input because it's coming from NIST, which is a federal agency that we fund with our tax dollars. They are very open for public input and comments and this sort of stuff. And if you want to get involved in these sort of things going forward, you may do so. So in 2014, the first version was released. They did more work and so forth, even a conference in Baltimore, which is pretty interesting. They then had this Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, which meant that changed it from being, it's just an executive order. Now it's a federal law that NIST is to create and develop and maintain the CSF. And then in 1.1 was released in 2018, so basically 4 years. So we're a little bit beyond that 4-year period. And this is the road they did for 2000, which basically for over 2 years. Requests for input, comments and so forth, workshops, which were all virtual, though this one, they did have some working sessions where there was face-to-face meetings at the NIST headquarters. So a lot of concept papers and drafts and this sort of stuff. And all of this was done publicly. If you're curious to know what these papers were and then concepts they put forth in the drafts, they're all out there for you to pick up and take a look at. There was no secrecy. Like I said, these were workshops that anyone could go in and be involved in, and I did, because they were all public, and we had a lot of it. I think there was like hundreds and hundreds of people, and not just what I find very strange with the CSF is a lot of foreign interest in it. They created the NIST CSF for U.S. Critical infrastructure, yet there has been from the get-go a lot of foreign interest in it. Thus, there's like foreign translations, and they know a lot of other foreign countries have taken it and used it as well. And then, of course, finally in February of this year, 2.0 was released. So I wanted to quickly touch on controls. Hopefully you guys know what controls are, but I've always encountered people that don't, or they have a misunderstanding. So basically they're just activities that the people perform or systems to ensure the business objectives are met. Kind of lame, kind of explanation, but it is. It's sort of like, okay, if we want to make sure that you're doing things properly, this is the process you need to follow to make sure things are done well. Like, okay, we want you to do this activity, we want you to do this activity, and so forth. And IT controls, there's things such as change management. Are you updating software? Was that done properly? Or did you blow things up and wreck things? Access control, who has access? Who determined who got access? Was that approved? Backups, incident management, all these are important security controls. And many times we need to have, and the thing that is important is controls can be policies, they can be procedures, they can be guidance. I emphasize that because I've encountered people where they ask me, oh, do you understand controls? Like, oh yeah, I work with policy and procedures, and I get a dirty look, and I'm like, yes, dude, policies are controls. It's not just some automated system. If you have a password policy that says our passwords must have this construction, great. You need to have it in your freaking policies, and then you implement it in your system to enforce it. They go together. So, sorry to be pedantic about it, but I've gotten pretty annoyed with people not understanding these sort of concepts. So here's an example of a control, and I use with 1.0, which so they have protection against malware, pretty straightforward. And in version 1.1, this was blanking on the thing, but the DECM4, which is malicious code, is detected. And just so you understand, this is what is in the CSF, and that's all that's in the CSF. Doesn't go any further to it. This is why in the CSF that we match up what are called informative references, which we tie into other frameworks. That way we can get into all the big nitty-gritty details in those. So in this case, they tie this to COBIT and 27001 and all the others and so forth, because it was just easier that way. I'm not sure if you guys have ever looked at the controls in ISO 27002, but they get pretty in-depth. I think malware is probably a page or two of information. So with the CSF, they're not going to put all that into the CSF. They're very high-level, controls. Then they match them up with all these informative references so that you can get into the nitty-gritty. Now that's in 1.0. In 2.0, they've now changed it. It's now part of DECM09. Computing hardware and software and their data are monitored to find potentially adverse events. Kind of more generic, but that's what they've done in the new 2.0. And of course, the thing is, and I messed up and should have had this in another slide, is then you have, of course, your frameworks, which of course pull together these controls as a sort of a suggestion. This is what you want to have. So that's where you get your frameworks like 27002, NIST 853. For those of you in the session last, 800, 171, and so forth. These are a collection of frameworks because, unfortunately, and this again, my experience as a consultant is a lot of people, if you say like, okay, you're now in charge of our security program here at our company, what do we need to implement? A lot of people were like, I'm not sure. They basically need to have someone to come in and say, okay, look, yeah, here's a list of 100 controls. This is what you need to put into place. Oh, okay, great, I'll take that and implement it. So a lot of people, unfortunately, need to be given a list of things to do to implement in their system to have a secure environment. And that's where we get our frameworks and standards and so forth. So in the Security Framework, this was actually the original name, Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. That was the big thing when they rolled it out, was our critical infrastructure, power plants, dams, bridges, and all these sort of things. And then it kind of went beyond that, where it's like, oh, we can use this for small businesses, we can use this for mom and pop shops and this sort of thing. Now it's just the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It's as simple as that. Like I said, this is the front cover of it. It's very, very simple. Version 1, like I said, was released in 2014. It was 41 pages, as compared to some other frameworks that are like hundreds. Version 1.0 came out like 4 years later, 48 pages, wasn't that much longer. And of course 2.0, which came out, it's 27 pages. And if you find that surprising, that's because they pulled out a lot of stuff and put it into supplemental documents, which I will talk about. And like I said, it's very high level as a framework. It is voluntary still. I have heard of things that within the government space, they're now kind of enforcing it with some government agencies, similar to FSMA. But outside, no one has yet started to enforcing its use. I'll be honest, I would think that with the importance of like cybersecurity insurance, that some of those organizations might start pushing it, but I haven't seen it yet. I know even with, because I do handle the questionnaires we get from our cybersecurity and carrier, they'll ask things like, oh, do I have a incident response policy? Do I have a disaster recovery policy, and so on and so forth? But I don't see things like, oh, have you been assessed against the cybersecurity framework? How does your company stand up against that? I haven't seen that yet. I keep expecting that, but who knows? Again, it is not a one-size-fits-all. That's again a problem with frameworks, especially with those people who don't quite get it, where like I talked about, oh, you give them a list of, oh, here's 100 controls, you need to look at those 100 controls and say like, oh yeah, this makes sense, this makes sense. Oh, this one here, this doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, my company doesn't have a loading dock. I don't care about loading dock security. And no, I'm not joking, I'm literally that way. We do not have a loading dock at my company. I don't care about loading dock security. I'm not going to spend any time on that. I think I can skip that and focus on the important things, as well as, and this is also something that people don't quite get, is you get that list of 100 controls, you need to be doing a risk assessment and realize, oh, we need to add some to that list. No one seems to want to talk about that. But that's how frameworks work. This is the basic component of the cybersecurity framework. It's 3 parts. The core, which are basically the controls, that's where most people focus on. Profiles, which again gets into like where you're at, where you want to be, what's the gap, and address it. And then the third part, which I don't care for, and most people don't seem to care for, which is the implementation tiers, which gets into a sort of maturity model that's not quite a maturity model. So again, some more nitty-gritty about the framework. It is now 6 functions. It used to be 5, so it's been a change. The next one is, of course, our categories, and I thought this was kind of interesting when I started looking at the numbers. It's 22 categories. The last version was 23. The first one was 22. So there's been no change in the category numbers. And then the subcategories, which gets more granular, it's not a big change either. It's now 107. It was 106. What they also do is they cross-map the subcategories to the new thing this time is implementation examples. I'll talk about that shortly. And then the informative references. However, these 2 are not in the document. They're online because the idea is that they're going to be expanding and adding to them and this sort of stuff. So they're not going to put it in the actual document itself. So that's also how they're able to keep the document shorter. Profiles, they've done a lot of big work on profiles. So now we have the concept of not just your current profile and your future profile, but this idea of a community profile, which I think is very, very powerful. And then, the tiers. This, this is the logo for the CSF, which I've always liked. So that's the original logo with 1.1, and this is the new one. So like I said, they've added, they had the identify, protect, detect, respond, recovery, which are the 5 cores. They added the 6th one, and I was thinking, well, how are they going to do that? Going to cram it into the circle? Instead, the 6th one is govern, and they did it this way, which I think is wonderful because the idea is that govern is kind of like the foundation for the other 5. The other thing I like about this being a circle is, again, you get people who are like, oh, so I start here and I go do, and I'm done. And no, you're not, because the circle is better because you start typically with identify and you work your way around and get to recovery, and guess what comes next? You start all over again and make improvements, and it's going to be continuous improvement or continuous process improvement. However, it needs to be an ongoing activity. You got to be doing better. You go through 1 year and you come back and you say, okay, let's do another risk assessment, see what we're doing, what can we do better, and so forth. And for my company, we get assessed by other frameworks and standards and whatnot, and sorry, when they come back the next year, it's not going to be, oh, we're going to do the same thing. It's like, oh, we're in a new version. We need more stuff, and you need to do better, and you need to add this stuff. So I like the circle better because hopefully it puts in people's mind that it's continuous. Never stops, keeps on rolling. This is also the way, a lot of these graphics, by the way, are pulled from the document itself. So, yes?
I actually wanted to ask, so the previous diagram was a circle, and as you were saying, like, the process never stops. I was going to ask, one, is it possible then that you can kind of pick up at, like, you said mostly you start with identify, but like, let's say something just happens and you have to respond to something, can you start at
Well, the idea is that when you're setting up your framework and what you have, the first thing is you want to know, you start with identify because you have to find out what it is you have to secure. That's the idea. Okay. And that might seem strange, but I've gone to companies where I could come and say, hey, could you give me your inventory of your hardware and your software? And I get like, And the thing is, you can't secure what you don't know what you have. That's why you have to know what hardware do you have, what systems do you have, what data do you have. Once you have that, then I can figure out how to protect it and detect it. Respond is, oh, heaven forbid you do have an incident, and then you recover for it. But that's why we talk about, you start with identify, you figure out what the heck you have. So this is also, the idea is that you have your functions, now 6, categories, and then you get into subcategories. Another one here that's all again from the book, where you tie in all the subcategories into the implementation examples and the informative references. So these are the 6 functions, and most of them are pretty straightforward. Govern, establish and monitor the organization's cybersecurity risk management strategy, expectations, and policy. You're laying your groundwork. What is your policy? What is your posture? What are your risks? Are you a healthcare organization that has to worry about protecting PHI? Or are you a retail organization that has to worry about protecting credit card information? Or you're a defense contractor where you're dealing with very sensitive information, whatever that may be. That's all going to be different. It's, again, not one size fits all. Different organizations have different needs. Identify, again, you understand your risk, but to do that, you have to understand what the heck you have. Protect, you put in safeguards to protect that. Detect, you're watching for that activity, whether it's a security operations center or automated tools or what have you. You respond to a detected incident. That's your incident response, practices. And recover, that's your disaster recovery, get back up and running. Honestly, when I deal with a lot of InfoSec people, most of them seem to want to hang around in the detect, protect area. That's the cool place. Ooh, I'm red team, I'm blue team. That's there. And then your incident response folks, they're kind of like over here a little bit. And your disaster recovery, sometimes we kind of don't even think of disaster recovery as being InfoSec people. And then of course the govern, it's like, oh God, those are those compliance people, So that, but the thing is, if you work in the if you are InfoSec and you're working upwards in your career, you find out that no, you need to understand more of it, and it all works together. Okay, and then of course this one goes into showing what it is, things that are broken out, and most of it's pretty straightforward. I mean, recovery. You execute your incident response plan. You do communications. Okay, detect, okay, continuous monitoring, okay, that's your, SIEM tool and this sort of stuff, always watching, always watching, and letting you know, and of course, if you have anything, you want to analyze it. Was that really an issue, or was it, some idiot, kicking a can or what have you? I wanted to go a little bit more further into some of these to get you to understand, like, so govern has like organizational context, things like, having a mission, stakeholder expectation, all that really boring, dull stuff that most of us don't care about, but is really important. Your risk management strategy, what are your priorities, your constraints? A lot of this is going to be, unfortunately, going to be done more by your upper management than the practitioners. Roles, responsibilities, who's doing what? That gets into things like a RASCI chart, who's responsible for this, who's responsible for that, who's your incident response team and stuff like that. Have your policy put into place, your oversight, who's watching all that sort of stuff. And then what's become bigger is your whole supply chain risk management. Companies are not a monolith. A lot of them are now relying upon other companies. Most companies are like, oh, well, yeah, we rely up, we're putting our stuff in the cloud. Okay, great, now you rely upon their security. Oh, we're using Office 365. That's where our email is. So you're relying upon that. So a lot of companies get really, really complex where they go in and they're having like half a dozen or a dozen other companies they have to rely upon, not just, your MSPs, your MSSPs, your cloud vendors and so forth, where it's not everything is done in-house anymore. And you had to rely upon that and make sure that hey, you can't just say like, oh, it's over in the cloud, we don't have to worry about it. You do. Identify is pretty straightforward. Asset management. And again, assets are not just hardware, it's also your software, it's your data, it's your facilities, all that sort of stuff. You need to understand what that is. Again, when I got into companies, I say like, okay, what data do you have and where is it? And I'm like, it's in the system. Yeah, that doesn't work. And I'm being silly, but unfortunately, I've had these conversations. Then, of course, you risk something. You need to understand, what are the risks to your organization and what things that you face. And then, of course, you want to improve it. Again, I talked about that earlier, continuous process improvement, doing better. You did okay this year, what can you do better next year? Because the bad guys, they're going to come after you and they're going to do better next year, so you need to make improvements as well. Protect, again, first off is basically your IAM, Identity and Access Management, pretty straightforward. Awareness and training, you guys are doing security awareness training, right? On a regular basis, right? Data security, you're managing consistently. Platform security, hardware and software and so forth, even if it's virtualized. And then, of course, this concept of resilience, hopefully you've heard that term before, of cyber resilience. That is, if something happens, can your system recover? If you think about it, it's like a tree being blown in the wind. It gets pushed over, but as it come right back, that's resilient, versus it gets pushed over and it snaps and breaks. It's not resilient. Detect is in continuous monitoring. That's become bigger and bigger, whether it's automated, whether it's AI, whether it's SOC, or all of them. And then, of course, you need to do analysis. That's one thing I've always seen with incident response is, oh yes, we got a report. Is it legit or is it not legit? My place, we use a certain tool, and every so often we get this weird ass alert, and I'm like, oh, okay, what the heck's going on? Go talk to our IT admin, and like, okay, are you doing something? Did you cause it? Oh yeah, that was me. Okay, great. I don't have to worry about it. Because if it wasn't you, then I got to worry. And the respond, this is of course your incident management, analysis, reporting and communication. Again, people kind of forget that, is that, yeah, if you have an incident, you may be having to report to law enforcement, as the case may be. And then, of course, you need to mitigate that issue. And then recovery, it's executing your recovery plan. and again, communication, both internal and external. I think one thing I've always heard is that you don't want to have an incident and find out about it because the reporters are showing up at your doorstep, because your data has been exfiltrated or something. Or as I had with one of my clients, and no, I'm not making this up, when they had Interpol show up because a secretary got spoofed to send money to a terrorist account. So, okay. So one thing you might, what they did was they did a lot of reworking. And one thing was like, they had this whole new frame, this new profile, or are they creating new stuff? But what they basically did was they kind of reshuffled and moved things around. So there wasn't, I went through and did a look at stuff, and there's actually a document. If you're that curious about it, there is a PDF they created that shows all the things they moved around. So for instance, the governance stuff, a lot of that they just pulled over from Identify and some other areas and put into governance. So they moved about 28. They also merged and moved about 32. There are 14 new ones, but they did leave things unchanged. And one thing kind of initially threw me off when I was going through it is that they didn't, anything that they left in place, they didn't renumber them from the prior version. What initially I thought was like, well, that was kind of weird. Then I'm like, well, no, that makes sense, because if you'd use 1.1 and you had identified things as certain numbers, it doesn't mess you up because they've renumbered them. So if you look at the subcategory, you'll see gaps in the numberings in some cases because they didn't do renumbering. It initially threw me off because I was doing a count, and I'm like going, it's 9 here. Oh, no, it's not 9 because there's 5 they removed, but that's what they did. So this is kind of what it looks like in some of the documents where you have categories, you have the subcategories. Now this picture was taken from the draft, so that shows like where the former ones are. See, like formerly these. In the final version, all that is gone. So implementation example, I said this is a new one. This is to show potential ways to achieve each outcome, and it's only available online. So this is what it looks like. So in this case here we have the organization mission is understood and forms cybersecurity risk management. So example, share the organization's mission through vision and mission statements, marketing and service strategies to provide a basis for identifying risks that may impede that mission. Okay, pretty straightforward, but at least it gives people an idea, because I know for a lot of people, if I tell them this, they're going to be like, what? I don't know what to do. But if we give them this, they're like, oh, okay, I think I understand how to do that. And by this being online, I think that the idea is that we can have more examples. Because you see in this one here, there's only one example, where this one has 2. So it's people being able to add to it. Now the informative references, that was I felt that was really important. In version 1 and 1.1, within the document there was only 5. So they had listed COBIT, the critical security controls, 27001 and 853. And then of course, if you look at that, you're like, wait a minute, where's PCI? Where's whatever your favorite framework or standard is, where is that? So in 1.1, even though they kept the same 5, they added more. But to make it easier on NIST was basically, look, if you got some framework or standard or whatever that you want to cross-map into CSF, great. That's on you to do the work and give it to us, and we'll put it up on our website. We're not going to do the work for you, which is probably good because some of these things get updated. Like the critical security controls, we're up to version 8 now. I think when they first started with the CSF, it was a version like 6 or 7, and in some cases I wasn't even sure what version they were talking about. So this is something really important, that by doing this, it kind of offloaded a lot of work off of NIST onto these other organizations. As I said, in 2.0, there are no informative references whatsoever in the document itself. It's all online. And unfortunately, there's only like a 2 or 3. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regards. And this is actually a screenshot of that online. This is one way you can pull it out as an Excel spreadsheet. So you can see how it's done, where you got the categories, subcategories, the implementation examples, and then the informative references. So these are the different matches up and so forth. Not so many at this point because it's only been kind of the NIST documents, but as it goes on and we get more and more of them, that's going to be pretty packed. Because in the old version there was like 30 or 40 informative references and so forth. So CSF profile, this is really important because this is a way to figure out what your company currently stands against the CSF, where your future is, and then, so the idea is you have current, which is where you're at or trying to, future, where you want to be at, and then of course you want to have a gap analysis, where your gaps, and address it. Now what has become really powerful with profiles has been the concept of a community profile. And the idea of that is pretty simple. It's like, okay, I'm a hospital, let's say, what should I be doing with the CSF as a hospital? Maybe I'm not too certain, but hopefully maybe some hospital organization has come out and say like, oh, here is our recommended hospital community profile for the CSF that you can follow. And that makes it easy for people to say like, oh, this is what I need to implement and what I need to be doing. And that's what they did with the prior one, and they're really, really emphasizing that. And it becomes very, very powerful, because then you can have, okay, you're in the financial area, like, okay, maybe you're insurance or banking, maybe there's a banking profile that exists, or an insurance agent profile, and so forth. That makes it easier, because then you're not just like, oh, this is what I kind of think is the best way to do it. You can have someone at a higher level, much more knowledgeable, come and say, this is what we recommend you should do because you're in our industry, and you can follow that. Also, they've kind of using the profiles in general as a way to implement the CSF. The idea being like you figure out where you're at, figure out where you need to go, and use that as your method to implement the CSF. Because the old section they had on implementing it has basically gone out the window. So the idea here is, of course, you take in objectives and expectations and whatnot, to create your current profile and your target profile. This is also taken from the document. The idea is, you scope it, gather information, create that profile, analyze gaps, implement, and what I've been saying, repeat. Do it again the next year. Tiers. As I said, I don't like the tiers. A lot of people don't like the tiers. You don't have to use the tiers. It's a way of looking at kind of like the maturity of your organization when it comes to security. They have 4 levels, and they, of course, assess it against different things such as your process, risk management, and so forth. One thing with all maturity models is, I don't care whether it's you got 3 levels or 7 levels or what have you, a lot of people have this idea that they got to get to the top level. And you don't, because you need to go to the whatever level is best for your organization, because if you try to go to higher levels, it'll be a higher cost, but is it really to your benefit? That's a big mistake what people make. All that they said with the CSF was that they would least like companies to be at level 2. Whether you are going to go to 3 or 4 will depend upon your organization, if it makes sense for your organization. So again, these are and the thing is with the tiers, it's a maturity model. It's not really a maturity model, which is why I don't like it. I prefer a true maturity model myself. And of course, they talk about risk governance, management, third-party risks. When I think of a maturity model, again, this is what it is: a degree of formality, optimization of processes, going from ad hoc, seat of your pants, oh, we'll fix it as we do best, whereas you're more formally defined, like, oh, this is our step-to-step process of building a machine. We've reviewed it, we know it works, and we're being consistent and so forth. They can be process-oriented or people-process technology. I'm more familiar with the CMMI. I was from an IT organization that was officially CMMI level 3, so I'm familiar with this. I know a lot of people don't like it because it needs a lot of overhead, but we didn't get outsourced because we were so efficient, so I see it as a value. Sorry.
What is CMM? Sorry?
Capability Maturity Model. It came originally from Carnegie Mellon and worked from that, mainly for software engineering, but now been expanded outside of software engineering. So CMI integrated goes beyond that. We were an IT organization that was officially CMI level 3. So this is it. Level 1 up to 5, and please note 5 is not optimized, it's optimizing. But to get to 4 or 5, that's very, very difficult, a lot of expense. And you'll get the people who go like, oh yeah, but there's also a level 0. That's where you get like, you're doing nothing, you're horrible. And then you get the wags who are like, oh yeah, but there's also the level -1 for the ones that are even worse than that. So there's a lot of information also with privacy. I'll just say this about privacy because a lot of people misunderstand it quickly. Because if you think about it, it's like, oh, well, I don't want you to see my diary. That's private. Private or secure? Security, privacy is the same thing? No, it's not. Here's the easiest way to think about it. Security is dealing with access. Privacy is dealing with usage. And we need it together because we don't want you to access my data, because I don't want you to misuse my data. That's more when you get into privacy, particularly in the healthcare realm, we're using privacy in the terms of how you use that data. See, so as I issue with data processing, that we get a lot about like, okay, well, like in a hospital, okay, well, I can't use that data to like sell you stuff and things like that. But there's a lot of overlap between security and privacy, but there are some other things that kind of change that doesn't. And of course, there's the privacy framework from NIST as well, and there is actually overlap between it. It's going to be kind of interesting where things are going. So some of the next steps, like I said, it was actually released, 2.0 was released in February, so it's a little over a month old. As I noted, we need a heck of a lot more informative references. There's very, very little. They've created a lot of supplemental materials, which I'll talk about, but they need to be finalized. There's several that are in initial public draft still. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Baldrige Cybersecurity Excellence Builder. So NIST has a program called the Baldrige Excellence Program to get companies to be more quality, and they created the Baldrige Cybersecurity Excellence Builder, way back, 2019, but it's at level, it's tied to version 1.1, so we need to have a new version. And NIST is now starting to do an update of the privacy framework. So if privacy is your bag, you might want to take a look into it. This is what they have on the website, except there's a little problem. We're in quarter 2. We haven't even gotten any concept papers. That was supposed to be in quarter 1. So they've kind of slipped. So there's been no concept papers yet. There's been no workshops scheduled yet, and we're already in Q2. So maybe they kind of slipped. I don't know. And I'm a little bit concerned because they seem to think they're going to get this all done this year and roll out version 1.1 beginning next year. Maybe a little bit too ambitious. I don't know. But because I do have to worry about privacy as well as where I'm at, so I will definitely keep an eye on this. So some resources. NIST actually has a lot of resources. So the first, that's their website for all cybersecurity stuff. If you want the privacy framework, that's the next one. NIST framework, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Basically, that's a framework to set down standards for InfoSec jobs and responsibilities. So there's a lot of coverage. They actually, I didn't really know this, but they actually have a whole small business cybersecurity corner now. And then I mentioned about the Baldrige. that's where you can go for that. Of course, if you go to cybersecurity, you can go to related programs and go from there. So it's pretty straightforward. So these are the other documents they've created, which I have copies of. So they've got a resource and overview guide, a small business quick start guide, using organizational profiles, using the tiers, enterprise risk management, cybersecurity risk management, and then a guide to creating the community profiles. And some of them, actually several of them, if you see IPD, that means initial public draft. So they haven't been finalized yet. And I'm kind of a document nerd. Does anyone notice a problem with my list here? Okay. Where is SP 1304? I noticed a gap there, so I don't know, is that a planned document they're still working on or what? So I notice those sort of things, so, but I'm weird. That's actually the website for the Small Business Corner that I mentioned. Training. There is no official training for the Cybersecurity Framework, okay? The only one I'm very familiar with is from ISACA, but they're built it around using COBIT to implement the CSF, and I'm like, I never quite figured that one out. If you're not familiar with this organization, this one has really been pushing their certifications and their whole program built upon the CSF. These are 2 books. You can get them off of Amazon. You can go to the website. And I just saw on LinkedIn they now have a partnership of some sort with HP Enterprise to push out their training and this sort of stuff. So if that's your bag, that's something to look at. Certification, especially in light of what was the session before me on the CMMC and their whole framework and the whole system of certifications. And the thing is, I've seen this thing for ISO 27001 and COBIT and all these other frameworks where you as your company can be certified to be compliant with the framework, and people can be certified to be compliant or can know it. There isn't any. And as far as I know, and I base this upon conversations when I've gone to these workshops, NIST is not interested in this. They don't want to push, any official, NIST CSF certified company and all that. They don't want to get into that. So good or bad, I don't see that changing. But I just know from the workshops, they're like, yeah, no. So, because I've seen some silly stuff with this. When I was a consultant, I had companies who were like, oh yeah, we want to be certified against, we want you to come assess us against the CSF and give us our CSF rating number. And I'm like, rating number? What are you talking about? I'm fairly knowledgeable about it, and I've never heard of any sort of rating number for the CSF, but I guess some people out there think that. I'm kind of a book nerd, and I've always been kind of disappointed that no one has really come out with a, complete dummies book for the CSF or anything like that. The only people done it have been ISACA, and it's tied to their, using COBIT to implement the CSF. Whatever, guys. So some conclusions. I had hoped they were going to get rid of the tiers. Yeah, I guess that sucks to be me. Obviously, they're going to have to continue to add to the informative references. I'm hoping that we'll get more examples. They continue to add to the website. I was really, really impressed. I went and looked at all the stuff they had there. They've been doing a lot of good stuff up on their website. And hey, we paid for it, so let's put it to use. They've had a lot of good, all the new supplemental information, all the quick start guides was great. One thing that was missing, and this is more if you're familiar with it from the old days, was they always had a roadmap document that kind of laid out their plans of what they kind of felt needed to be coming from the CSF, and they don't have it this time. And I don't know if it's just they're still working on it or what. I kind of missed that. It was interesting. We continue to see more groups and organizations continue to use it. Like I said, I've always been very amazed by how much international interest has been with the CSF. when I went to some of the workshops, they actually had to have whole sessions with, people from foreign governments there to talk about it and this sort of stuff. We created it for us in the U.S., but to me, it's amazing how much interest it is overseas. I still hope to see more resources. I mean, to me, when I see third parties come out with books and other resources, that shows the popularity of something, and it's kind of surprising to me that we haven't seen more, but that's me, and maybe, that's just my idea. So, any questions? I certainly want to get feedback on this, because I try to improve this. I'm actually trying to offer this at some other conferences, so I like feedback. I'm constantly looking for things like, ooh, you spent too much time on blah, that was dumb. I wanted to hear more about this, because obviously this is kind of like my view of what I thought was important, and I'm trying to avoid not going too deep down the rabbit hole with stuff, and try to give a good mixture, but certainly I want to hear from other people. So, yes?
Are you aware of any benchmarks? I mean, I know there's no assessments or formal, but like my CEO has asked, like, how can we know how we're doing?
There isn't. That's part of the problem. Is that was something that was brought up at past workshops of metrics and measurement and this sort of stuff, and that was used to be in the roadmap, and they've never really addressed that. And to a degree, NIST is sort of like they didn't really want to do that. They were hoping to push it off to some nebulous, someone else will take care of it, and no one has. Because I know as an assessor, that's one thing that a lot of the companies were probably coming to us like, well, I want to be assessed because I want to compare us against these guys, and I'm like, exactly, and there really isn't one. I don't know how it could be, especially when NIST is like going like not us, leave us out of it. I'm like, so.
I just want to augment something you were saying earlier. I think very early on in your presentation, you mentioned that the government doesn't require that anyone use the framework. But I think that in light of the SEC's recent regulations that have been created, rulemaking on cybersecurity, so that requires disclosure, but more importantly, it actually requires that you have a risk program. And so it is a de facto pressure for every publicly traded company to actually use a framework. But in addition to that, one really interesting thing that they said in there is that it applies not only to publicly traded company, but any company of consequence, really. So that means that if you're a meaningfully large company, or you have a significant amount of private data, or these sorts of things, that you really should expect to be at least approached by federal law enforcement of some sort, FTC, SEC, if you have a breach and something goes wrong, you don't have a program in place.
Yeah, I think it's something that's coming, but it's been kind of nebulous. Like that, I kind of expected that with like the cybersecurity, cyber insurance, because I mean, I get questionnaires from them, and like, well, do you have this, and I'm like, why can't you say like, hey, have you been assessed against the Cybersecurity Framework, and how did you stand, and this sort of stuff? And it probably could be part of like, there's no real measurement against it, that maybe that's why that hasn't happened. For my company, I have to deal with high trust and SOC 1 and 2. So that's our assessment. So if you come to me and my company, say like, oh, have you been assessed? I'm like, yeah, I trust SOC 1 and 2. Here you go, leave me alone, but.
I think that's the issue, is the lack of the third-party audit assessment, like check the box or here's a score kind of thing. Like, two works because you.
Yeah, or even the last session on the CMMC, because I was kind of involved with that because I came in RP, read as a practitioner in that, and I saw that sort of the issues with that. But yeah, it's a big thing in the overall in the whole industry.
Yeah, I would say that we're seeing from like Liberty Mutual and some other insurers, they've got this ransomware rider typically that's in there that has more of this if you want to protect against that. But I would just say to everybody here, and you've probably already done this, but the interesting place to see where the government goes is generally where they have a high-profile case that they've made. I say this coming from the government,
Yeah.
in the past, and the complaints they make against them. The FTC did that with Uber. It's probably 20 to 50 pages of complaint. But the really interesting one, I would argue, is if you go out and look at the SEC complaint against SolarWinds, they argue that because SolarWinds said they used NIST CSF and they used certain things, that they must have them fully implemented. And so I think that is telling us where they're trying to bring that standard, and they're using it in a legal case against SolarWinds. So
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of expecting something like that for the last several years, and just kind of surprised that we haven't really seen it. In fact, with our cybersecurity insurance, you know, we just like a month ago, we got their questionnaire that was more aimed at ransomware, but it was all like, oh, do you have an instant response, plan? Do you have disaster recovery? Do you have backups? Are they immutable? Blah 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 blah, and nothing like, oh, have you had a assessment or this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I don't mean to monopolize this. The only other feedback I gave is I thought it was really good with the new CSF governance part.
Uh huh.
The highlight I would make to everybody is that if you want to do all the fun stuff where you said where everybody wants to be, you'll be chasing your tail all the time if you don't do governance right? And that's the thing, if you get it right, it gives you the space and the time to be proactive.
Well, even more on that, I mean, I know this from experience where I was in an IT organization and we moved because we put in the processes in place. We got out of the firefighting mode and got into like, oh, now we can give value back to our company because we are building systems consistently, and we're not going and chasing our tail and going and fixing things. But sadly, when I go and talk to other IT people, my peers, and explain this, they're like, I don't have time for that. I'm firefighting. I can't get out of firefighting because I'm firefighting. And I'm like, oh God, you know. But
In Florida, there was legislation, I don't know if it passed, where if you were compliant with, and I think NIST CSF might have been one of the examples, you were less likely to be liable for outcomes.
right.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Okay.
That's kind of two different pieces. I think the first statute is
Cool, thank you.
Section 282, and that was required state and local public government entities to declare a framework that they were going to adopt, register with the state, and adhere to. And then there's now one that's passed the Florida House and Senate. It's pending signature by the governor that would shield those organizations if
Private organization.
and I'm not sure that currently is just public sector, but those things typically come out and then they're used as models. So insurance would probably follow things like that.
Yeah.
But that's pending, but that's big because that gives those of us that work in public sector the leverage with to get the budget to be able to do that, because now we'll be protected against the liability.
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you for your time. I'm going to be here all day if you want to grab me.